Your Legislators is made possible by the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. From developing best practices that help farmers better protect our natural resources to the latest innovations in corn-based plastics, Minnesota corn farmers are proud to invest in third-party research, leading to a more sustainable future for our local communities. Minnesota Farmers Union, standing for agriculture, working for farmers. On the web at mfu.org.
Good evening and welcome to this week's version of Your Legislators. My name is Barry Anderson. I'll be your host this week and all the weeks that follow as we unravel the mysteries of St. Paul. This program belongs to you, and we invite you to call in or to otherwise send your questions in to us via the instructions on your screen, and we'll see that your questions about the legislative issues of the day get to our distinguished panel of guests. Now, our panel of guests is a little abbreviated this evening because the House is still in session, but we have two very able senators to help us, and they can carry the load in the House as well. So we'll have them talk about their colleagues in both chambers. We begin this evening, as we do each week, by introducing, in this case, our two guests who will be with us throughout the entire following hour. Let's begin with Senator John Hoffman from District 54, I believe, in Champlin. Senator Hoffman, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, the committees you serve on, your background in the legislature, your job in real life, whatever you think the viewers need to know about you. This is your opportunity.
I love it. Thanks, Barry. It's always good to be back, and I can't wait till we go back live because I miss sitting at the table. And I believe the last time Senator Abeler and I were on your show, you just kind of threw the pen up and said, do you guys just want to go ahead? Because the House people, now that they're not here, when they were there, we just kind of kept talking for them, right, Jim? I mean, it was one of the things. But sure. Senate District 34, Judge, it's a brand new Senate district, and it's Brooklyn Park, Champlin, Coon Rapids, Dayton, and Rogers. So it's a 20-mile stretch along the Mississippi River. It touches, all the way down to where Brooklyn Park touches Brooklyn Center, and then goes way out to the end to where Rogers, where Hennepin County meets Wright County. And I am the chair of Human Services. Of course, last session I was the lead. Abeler was the chair, and of course that's now changed this year. And I've been in the Senate since 2012. I was elected in 2012, started serving in 2013, and have been on a number of committees. My day job, I used to be the executive director of a Begin a New Recovery, which is a peer recovery organization here in the state of Minnesota. And since I became chair of Human Services, I am now doing human services, and I'm working as the strategist with Hoffman Strategic Advisors, which is going out and helping businesses understand how to do like SWOT analysis or how you do team building. So I've left the home and community-based services world, which, Barry, I have been part of my entire adult life. You and I have shared experiences in that. So, and so does Senator Abeler. So it's just absolutely a pleasure to be here. And it's great to be on with my best friend, Jim Abeler. So there you go.
All right, very good. Thank you, Senator Hoffman. Senator Abeler, representing District 55 in Anoka, as I recall. Senator Abeler, if you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background.
Oh, sure. In District 35 is Anoka, most of Coon Rapids, formerly known as John Hoffman territory, and which he grieves daily, and then a little southeast corner of Andover. And so it was quite a hard-fought campaign. The district changed a lot. And I thought I'd go visit a few of the neighbors, 21,780 of them. And they were gracious enough to send me back. And I've, shockingly, this is my 24th year in office between the House and the Senate. And pleased to be back on your show again. I do look forward to the in-person, but this is as good as we can do sometimes. And COVID, for all its remoteness, has helped people get together where they could not otherwise come and testify at the legislature and so on. And so the times have changed, and the Senate is now 33 Republicans and 34 Democrats, which John and I have swapped roles, and if I had to be replaced, I would not want to pick anybody different than him to do that. And he is eminently qualified and rising to the occasion. And I have actually a lot more free time. And so I was privileged to go fix up my mom's hurricane damaged home in Florida because I didn't have any meetings in December. So, and John probably had 100. So that was quite an adventure to spend 17 days doing that. But I'm just glad to be here, and nice to serve again, and nice to be with you.
So let's begin with sort of the news of the week or news of the last 10 days or so, and those are budget-related issues. The governor has released his proposed budget, and of course, governors propose, legislatures dispose. The two houses, the House and Senate, of course, have legislative responsibilities with regard to enacting the budget that will eventually be signed by the governor. And maybe we can have a few minutes of conversation about things that just sort of an overview of what you like about that budget, what are areas of concern, and maybe areas that are likely to produce maybe some sparks as we move forward in terms of where the final budget might wind up. Let's start with you, Senator Hoffman. Let's talk about the governor's budget.
You know, I want to start off with one statement, Your Honorable, is that when everybody's talking about the $17 billion surplus, right? And I just want to tell folks there's a couple of nuances here that have been bothering me in the past and bother me now. $1.12 billion of that surplus was money that was underspent in human services. What I mean by underspent was it wasn't spent on those people that we care for that was intended to be spent on. And there was numerous reasons why. Some of it relates to the fact that fee for service, there wasn't really any flexibility. So you had kids with autism that weren't getting the services that they were already budgeted to be paid for and didn't receive those services, right? You had day programs because of population size. You had your adult day services. You had nursing homes, group homes that had to shut down wings of their facilities because of the fact they had staffing related problems because once again, you look at the rate methodology wasn't there. The other thing that's added to that, Judge, is 767 million or so of federal medical assistance program money that's supposed to go into that bucket of human services actually went to the general fund. So when you add it all up, Senator Abeler will tell you it's $1.825 billion of that surplus should have been in human services. And so in a sense, people that should have gotten services didn't get services. And it bothers me because I think based on that money should have stayed or should stay in human services and provide for that. And then what has happened since then, of course, the governor, and I love your statement, propose and dispose. You know, it's like I've heard, that's the first time I've heard that. It's great. I'm going to keep it. But the other one was, you know, the governor proposes and the Senate write the checks, right? So there's going to be a process. And like I said to Senator Abeler, and like Senator Abeler said to me, you know, the governor's proposal on long-term care, it's a good start, but it doesn't stabilize the system, Barry, like the bill that Jim introduced last year and the bill I introduced this year, Senate File 7 last year, Senate File 6 this year. It actually stabilizes those industries that we care about. PCAs, home health aides, assisted living, nursing homes, group homes, and those services that are important to folks that we care about within the state of Minnesota. And so that's kind of the overall. I just wanted to highlight again to you, you know, why is it that Minnesota 1.825 billion sitting in that surplus that should be over here in Health and Human Services, and that's my pitch for the evening, Your Honor.
Senator Abeler, your thoughts?
Well, that's his story, and he's sticking to it. And we'll try to be broader. I've been in office for a while, I told you, and I thought I would be covering more territory in my time, but actually, both John and I have gone narrower and deeper. And we've been deeply immersed in the disability and the senior and county services side, all the waiver programs, close to 200,000 people under our watch. And we spend, what is it, John, $30 billion a biennium or something like that, state and federal, which is, it's real money. And and it's a really challenging population. And we've, in a bipartisan basis, have actually been pushing the governor to like notice this population. And if you look at the budget just now, to go a little broader, he spent, if he gets the spending ideas, it's going to be a $65 billion budget. There was a time we thought $35 billion was an enormous amount of money, but we were wrong. I think the old budget was like $48 billion or something like that. And so there's a $17.6 billion surplus. But if you don't mind me talking, John, so that wasn't quite enough. So he, in his budget, he took over $1 billion out of the Healthcare Access Fund, a couple $100 million from the reinsurance fund, which helps hardware store owners to get their insurance at an affordable price. Decided to raise the sales tax from 1/8 of a percent, raised car tabs $400 million over the 4 years, increased park fees to attend, fishing licenses, and wants to do a family leave program that will add 0.6% of a percent to the payroll of the as a tax to the places and to every business in Minnesota. And so and in that he still gave us pocket change in terms of the area that we care about so dearly. The human service long-term care sector, which is group homes, nursing homes, services for people with disabilities, is on the verge of collapse. And you need, so if anybody's looking for a job, we need 53,000 employees to do services to those very fragile human beings in those areas. And there's nowhere to find them. And they've spent down to the fumes in their reserves. And we've tried everything we could do. I haven't stood on one leg and held my breath, Senator Hoffman and Barry, but everything else but that to get the governor to notice. We've got hearing after hearing. And we were close to the finish line last time with a bill that would have injected $2 billion into the system, $1 billion state and $1 billion federal. And then, as you recall, negotiations kind of broke off at the end of last session, which doesn't change the need of the people who are in dire straits. So anyway, what you're seeing here is bipartisan agreement that we got to rescue these folks. We got to keep their services stable, or really bad things will happen.
And in addition to that, Judge, bicameral, you have folks over in the House. I was just with some Republican members of the Mahmoud Noor's committee, which mirrors the committee that Jim and I have, and they were saying the exact same thing Jim and I are saying to you right here. So it's not, and there was no discussion of Republican Democrat in that conversation about how are we going to achieve what we need for the people that are the most vulnerable in the state of Minnesota. And it absolutely bothers me. I don't know, without, and last night too, the conversation, one individual said, hey, how come nobody's talking about long-term care? And that's what got it going, was the fact that that's all Jim and I have been talking about, Your Honor, is the long-term care places. And it just doesn't bode well for me to say that where our priorities are there, especially when this happens. 1.3 million people are 65 and older in the state of Minnesota, right? We have more people that are 65 and older than we do that are in K-12 education. Yet when you look at the priorities, and I'm not taking anything away from education, right? Because I served in education locally, I served it on the state level, and I served it on a federal level, and I know the needs are there, right? And now what you're getting from the folks in the schools are mental health, substance use. You're probably seeing that in the legal world, right? I mean, you're starting to see an increase of youth that are just absolutely, being exposed to addiction that is not, there, and it's because of the fact that there's some mental health. So there's co-occurring stuff that's occurring, right? And then this goes in line with the Wilder Foundation when they talk about, our homeless population, 90% of our homeless population has some kind of disability, plus they have substance use. There's some co-occurring stuff that's happening in there. And that just bothers me. It really does. One more thing, Judge. The nursing homes, for example, right? When you talk about Jim's statement of 53,000 people that we could go into the caregiving facility, that's across all those buckets that we talked about. Just specifically nursing homes, because of how the rate restructuring is happening in them. There's one in the western suburbs at $7 million in the hole because of what Senator Abeler said they tapped in their reserves. There's another one that is has over 1,000 residents in all of its facilities, and they've been around for many years. And I won't tell you the name of them, but if you're on a Friday night, you say Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, right? So here's this organization that is really looking at possibly shutting their doors, Barry, because of the financial impact of 4 years, 4 to 5 years. That keeps me up at night. So.
Well, we will have the opportunity to continue the discussion on that question, because I know that it's a subject of concern to both of our guests and also to our viewers, and we frequently get questions, particularly on the nursing home piece. So we'll come back to that. But let's move on to some other questions from our viewers. This is a question that we haven't previously received, but it comes from a viewer in the Twin Cities area, and he wants to talk about elections. And he's very concerned about perhaps moving to a different system. He would prefer the ranked choice voting system, and he wonders whether or not this is something that might receive some legislative action this year. Let's start with you, Senator Abeler.
Sure. I was I told you I went to a few doors this summer, and one of the places they were persuaded this was the answer to make it all great, ranked choice voting. And so it's being used, currently in the metro and some other cities. And I'm not as big of a fan of it. I frankly, for reasons that you might not suspect, but I see not having ranked choice voting as a way for some of the smaller parties to occasionally win a race. And as a person who likes balance in government, I like divided government. I like more voices. We should have more of the minor parties represented. And I think ranked choice voting would actually take away that opportunity. There's many benefits that are touted, and I'm not even sure what Senator Hoffman thinks about that, but I'll leave it at that for now. And I'm sure it's coming up to a legislative body near you this session. I know the House seems to like it.
Senator Hoffman, your thoughts?
It's funny because everybody's like, you and Abeler think alike. No, we don't think alike. And this is one of those things where we don't think alike on Judge. It's, I used to not like ranked choice voting when I was on the school board that was trying to be, pushed years ago. And I looked at it and I thought, how do you engage more people other than the two systems? And this is where I would disagree with Senator Abeler. Can you imagine that? I disagree with Senator Abeler on the concept that it would be less people
That just means you're wrong. That's all.
I'm right, you're wrong, right? It's like, but I've come a long way on that, thinking, okay, because here's the thing, and Jim experienced for the first time in history an onslaught of icky money just dropped against him, with lies being spread about him, right? I mean, that's just been part of my election campaign, and everybody and their mother would say I'm a bad person, and they would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars against me. Jim experienced that this year for the first time, and it was not okay, Barry. It's just, to me, that's not okay. And I think my opinion in this, and I'm not a lawyer, but I can say my personal opinion in this is that having ranked choice voting would eliminate that ickiness that exists between two party systems. And rather, you were saying, okay, if I'm going to get in here, if I get 51%, both based on that ranked choice voting, that I win that. Plus, it would eliminate some of the things that we fight for on the fact that we have these caucus systems and we primaries. I mean, I think bottom line is it's worthy of a debate, Judge.
So there have been efforts to use ranked choice voting in a variety of places, and I don't have a position on it one way or the other, but one of the concerns that has sometimes been expressed is, in a ranked choice voting system, you might have one or two candidates who are about which a great deal is known. Then there are other candidates about which you know relatively little. And the problem that you run into is that you may have candidates who prevail, who've never really been part of the campaign conversation, so to speak, and they don't get the attention perhaps than the lead one or two candidates do, and the advantage of the first past the post system is that You know who you're voting for, and you may not know who you're voting for in a ranked choice voting system. How do you respond to that concern?
Go ahead, John.
You bring up some points, Judge, that I would hope that having an open conversation on that would flesh that out. I don't necessarily think that is. I've not seen that in my understanding of the ranked choice voting. I actually, a friend of mine ran for a local seat and ranked choice voting. She did not prevail. I mean, but it was, and it was like, I was like, how does this work? How do they understand this work? Right? There's a first, and then there's a second, and then there's third pass. But to me, that seemed like a more fair system on a local race than it would have been in the past, which would have, in the local race, you would have had, because of our new rules on voting and then absentee voting, it all of a sudden turned into a special election, and then it just spread it out over a matter of months, versus now the ranked choice voting, it was done, it was up, and it was done in a couple of days. And so I mean, I guess that should be something that is brought to the table and discussed, right?
And I think part of the goal is to get rid of primaries and the caucus system, and the caucus system's a mess anyway.
Yeah.
And so there's always a quest to make elections more fair. But this is my observation in my short tenure as I sat through many election bills. Whoever sees a benefit in a change wants it. And seldom is it the League of Women Voters, of which I'm a proud member for many years, wants to get more people voting and wants fair elections, and they talk about that as a goal. And everybody's for that goal unless they think they're maybe going to lose some votes if they change the rules a little bit. And so to me, that's what I see as the heart of some of these reforms. And I can tell you one thing, the two primary parties do agree. They don't want third parties, and which I think is really a problem. And I think we need some more active third parties to be even more robust. And but in my race, where they spent $526,000 against me by the end of October, and I don't know what the number is going to be. I don't know that goes away if there's still just two people in a race, especially when the races were as close as it turned out to be. So the best answer, Judge, is that good people stay engaged and they tell their neighbors, and the citizens will get the government that they elect, or the government that they pay attention to as they go about electing them. And so there's a lot of good and bad that can happen in that, but you need an engaged electorate at the end of the day, whatever method you use.
So I think our viewer would like to know. What the chances of success. I put two things on the table. One is ranked choice voting that he asked about, and then I would put a perennial on the table to ask about, which we've discussed in previous years, and that is the possibility of moving the primary to June.
Well, ask the guy in the majority. He knows that.
And I'm wondering what the chances are for either of those two outcomes. Senator Abeler,
Senator Hoffman, what's your idea? That's a guy who has no clue.
It's like I think the June primary thing is. I mean, that I think that's a reality, right? The ranked choice voting. I think if you can count to 34 in the Senate, you're good to go, Judge, and 67 in the House, you're good to go. I don't know what the count is on that. I think it's mixed. You got some Democrats that like it and some Democrats that don't like it. And I know some Republicans that like it and some Republicans who don't like it, right? But then the third one to add in there, Judge, is there's conversation now of the national popular vote, right? Which keeps the electoral college, but it changes how the electoral college is done. I mean, that will probably get some conversation this year as well.
And one thing your last thought on this, we'll move on to the next topic.
Oh, yeah. The one thing about election bills, the best thing that's been in the past, especially with divided government, is we required that there be bipartisan support for everything. I hope that principle holds. And a 34 Democrat, 33 Republican vote on significant electoral changes is not a good idea. And so I hope that we can get between the 40-yard lines on those changes, and we keep the balance that people really like in terms of electoral change. So I'll
It'd be
that's all
kind
I
of
got.
like your bill last year, which got 61 votes in the Senate. I mean,
There you
that was
go.
like
That's right.
a bipartisan,
That's
bill.
bipartisan. Yeah.
That was
We're interrupting the
bipartisan.
judge. The judge has important
Sorry.
work to do. Let's just let him do his. Yeah, it's all right.
All right, let's move on to a perennial question. We get this question often, and we're going to keep coming back to it until the legislature decides it one way or another. What is the status of, and what is your view about the possibility of legalizing cannabis? Senator Abeler, we'll start with you and then go to Senator Hoffman.
Well, I'm actually very concerned. And I do believe that the popular opinion is that we should do it. I'm not sure if the popular thinkers have thought of the downsides in a serious way. It is not a casual thing. The marijuana that we have today is not it's not what they had in college when I was in college, and that's not what has been around in the past. It's very potent, in some cases more than 90%. And even though people joke about reefer madness and all that, psychosis due to this very strong cannabis is very real. And I've had a number of people in my office talking about their son who's no longer with them and the psychosis he experienced, and doctors who are worried about the synaptic development up to age 25 of these young adults that never completes itself. And so the governor has been kind of glib and Mr. Winkler, like, oh, this is great, and the people, oh, let's go get loaded and it's all going to be fine. But there's huge issues on the safety on the highways. We heard the governor's bill today on legalizing it, and they had talk about prevention, but not $1 out of 100 FTEs, and I forget the budget, 100 million or so, for treatment. And it's a known fact that when you legalize this and make it more available, it's going to be more available and in the hands of middle schoolers. And Senator Hoffman's committee and mine is one that oversees treatment. And I was shocked, just absolutely shocked that they were saying, well, we're going to work on prevention and explain to these youngsters why it's just not a good idea. Well, how did that work with smoking? How's that working with alcohol? And even though marijuana is thought to be a tame drug, is no longer tame with the strength it's at. So I'm very concerned about it. And if we do legalize it, we have to for sure manage the potency, maybe at 15% or less, and then try to keep it out of the hands of even low 20s is bad, but I don't know how you keep it out of the hands of the younger kids. So thank you.
You forgot the second P they said today, Jim. They said prevention and partnerships. And I came back and I asked about prevention, treatment, and recovery. You got to have the three things that happen with that. And so there's a lot of gaps in this one, Barry. I'm looking at, okay, you put this money, but you're not hearing people talk about prevention, treatment, and recovery, right? And it's like that scares me as a policy person, because we know this: addiction is addiction is addiction, period, right? It doesn't matter. We know that the most folks that going through treatment right now, the addiction is alcohol. Legal alcohol in the state of Minnesota is the number one thing for treatment providers. Number two is methamphetamines, and number three is opioids, right? And so, but it's, addiction is a disease, and it's like, well, where in this bill is it talking about that, what Jim just brought up, prevention, treatment, and recovery? We have what, Jim, 428 treatment providers in the state of Minnesota. They're at a capacity, 50-some thousand people a year go through treatment in the state of Minnesota. And that's just on those top three, Judge, that I did. Now you're going to add another one that has a potential to be an addiction. And it's like, what are we doing to enhance the system that's already there to help support somebody if they do that? Second thing is, why aren't we taking this? And again, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But to get to the when, where is the conversation about how do you know somebody is under the influence when they're driving? What's the and Senator Abeler should talk about his own son, who is a sergeant of police in a major city in a state called Colorado, right? And I remember his stories, Jim, and I think you should share with that about what their process was, looking at what is a DUI or DWI, right? And then on top of that, you sit there and you say, well, wait a minute. Why aren't we looking at decriminalizing it first, right, and then go through the process on it? So I got more questions than I have answers to, Judge. Jim.
I can talk more, but if you want to take another question, Judge, we can do that.
All right. We have a question from a viewer in Worthington who was noting that at some point there was some discussion about rebating part of the surplus to taxpayers directly in the form of a direct check, and he's wondering what the status of that is as part of the discussion about the taxes and the surplus. Senator Hoffman, we'll start with you.
I wish I had an answer. I saw the judge. I saw the comment this morning by the governor on so many 2 million homes getting upwards of $2,500 per household for that. I don't know where they are in the tax committee. I do know that the emphasis in the tax committee has been about getting rid of the Social Security tax. We did pass the compliance with the federal law, which then was a tax rebate to people, in the state of Minnesota. But I don't know where that discussion is, Judge, out of the tax committee. I just know from the governor's budget proposal. That's it.
Senator Abeler?
Yeah, and in a rare show of early bipartisanship, we did pass that tax bill, which was worth about $100 million in savings in dribs and drabs across so many accounts. It's particularly easier to do your taxes now because we conform to the feds. I think in much more ways. I think we're still not all the way, but some of those ways actually cost more money to businesses. So I think we're keeping away from some of those. But so that was an early accomplishment. The rebates are juicy and like, oh, wouldn't that be nice to get some money in the mail? And so the downside to rebates, it's good to the money needs to go back to the people. We should not be spending $17.6 billion, or in the governor's work, close to $20 billion, counting the new taxes and taking money from other accounts. $20 billion. I don't believe it's sustainable. I think it's on a collision course with another deficit sometime. And we're going to wind up cutting some of the very programs we were so proud that were going to be increased to serve students or people with disabilities or whatever. Social Security tax, I have worked on that. I guess I've not been very effective. I've only got a partial reduction of it in all my time. But it came up at the door right at the top of the list of the people, particularly those in the senior or getting near the senior generation. But it needs to go. We're one of just a few states that tax it. And we lose people to Florida and Texas all the time, over $3,000 or $4,000 a year. And those people need to stay Minnesota residents and go on 2 or 3 month trips, but not try to escape. And the other taxes that we need to think about are ones that we can eliminate to reduce the burden on families and require the state to be more efficient in its spending, not just throw more money at this or throw more money at that. In the governor's proposals, there were many, many new programs brought up in the human services arena. $4.6 billion worth, as a matter of fact. And my comment to that was, well, how about if we take care of the programs we already got that need some help? Oh, like people with disabilities or people in nursing homes, or some of the programs that are going to help people stay independent, living independently, and able to have a job in the community as a person with a disability. Those were way underfunded, and now we open up more programs. And by the way, the proposal included 1,200 new FTEs. That's full-time equivalents. And not against hiring more state employees, but Judge, you may know this, but the state demographer says there's only 6,000 or 7,000 people entering the workforce this year in Minnesota as new people. And so that's, I don't know how you're getting Supreme Court justices at that rate. Or, maybe there's enough lawyers. That's probably funny. But so how are you going to get all the workers we need in the care systems? And when you had 1,200 people or propose it in one sector of government, it's sorry. Anyway, so Judge, your job is safe. There's just not enough people to try to go after your position. But you have to be prudent. And in a time when there's a lot of money, you want to salt away some. You want to reduce the burden on the people that got it there, and keep the program sustainable instead of spending on just a wild spree, which is what this is.
His job's not
Thank
safe. Wouldn't you have a thing in the Supreme
my job is safe. I hit mandatory retirement, as we learned in the last campaign, in the next couple of years. So
Yeah.
I'm irrelevant to this conversation. Senator Hoffman, do you have anything else to offer on this question?
No, I just want to remind viewers that $1.825 billion in that reserve, in the surplus, $1.825 billion was money that should have been spent on those current existing programs, like Senator Abeler just mentioned. So, yeah, I'm with him. I don't like the idea of new spending on top of the fact that we're going to do this on at the risk of those folks, our long-term care folks are experiencing right now. So 1.825 billion, that should just come
And
right
Judge,
over.
if I may, Senator Hoffman, if I can interview you. So if you round that up to about $2 billion, what impact would that have on the long-term care industry and sector? Would that make it more stable, or would that continue its road to collapse?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, Senator Abler, because one of the things that is in that bill that we're experiencing is the non-emergency medical transportation providers, right? We're experiencing the ability to pay more to those individuals that are doing home health care, so they can actually just have a job, and they would want to stay in that job because they're not competing. There's a competitive workforce factor in
So
there.
people could stay in their homes and not have to go to a nursing home so quick? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing when you would see the home health
Yeah,
aides
welcome
to
to the
be
Jim
able
Abeler Show. Sorry, Judge.
Jeez.
Uh, Senator Abeler has a new lawyer in the family, and if that new lawyer is paying attention, what we just saw there is what we call leading the witness.
Judge, there is one more thing that we want to be sure of, and something that's motivated myself, but even Senator Hoffman even more, if I may. And so, Senator Hoffman, are you aware of anybody who has come to harm and maybe lost a leg, or even had even more things happen to them because they couldn't get enough staffing? As I lead the
Yeah,
witness,
Judge. This one will bother you, Judge, because I know
it's a
who you
tragic
are.
story.
And there's a gentleman who spent weeks living 24 hours a day in his wheelchair because he couldn't get his home health aide folks to help move him from his wheelchair to his bed and back. So he lived all day in the wheelchair and slept in the wheelchair. He developed these bed wounds, these wounds on his body, and lo and behold, when it came time, they actually had to amputate his legs. They sent him home without any follow up support, and hence I'm just going off the report, Judge, and he died. And so that was one of those that I had said in the paper, I'm sick of people dying, and that was one of those where if we would have had stabilization in home health aides, rather than competing against Burnsville McDonald's starting at $21 an hour, we could have paid somebody that actually would have helped this gentleman get from his wheelchair to his bed. But he's dead, and that's just not okay.
Never again.
Never again,
So,
Jim.
so we have a question from a viewer in Lackawanna County, which we sometimes get into the weeds here on some of these questions, but they raise important issues, and I think it's useful to introduce this topic, even though from the perspective maybe of many Minnesotans, it doesn't seem all that significant. But he's concerned about the state taking away a driver's license because they're a few months behind in child support, and wonders if this isn't really counterproductive in terms of being able to produce child support. We've got that issue, but of course we've got this larger question of dealing with child support issues, which legislators frequently hear from constituents about. So let's introduce that topic and see what our guests have to say about it. Senator Abeler, you first.
It's come up, and I don't remember if we've tried to fix it or not. It doesn't really make sense. It was meant to be leveraged so that the deadbeat dad would pay the money that he's just sitting on. And I think it was made in a more simplistic time. I think it's a very complex topic, and there's a good many very sincere, if they're whichever parent it may be, the mom or the dad, who really want to do the right thing, but it's challenging for any number of reasons. But then when they lose their license, now they can't even go to work. That doesn't get any more money in the pocket. And, John, we should look into this. I think it's in Melissa's committee, but it's just something that just doesn't make sense. We used to have that in our jurisdiction, but it got shifted to the other one. What do you know about that?
I think you should rule. I think you should rule 21 that, Barry, back to us. I just think it's one of those, hey, which hand is the rock in? Bright ideas, and who the heck came up with that? Just absolutely. I when you said that, Judge, I'm like, that absolutely makes zero sense to me.
But it's not a
What's
new topic, but we haven't worked on it, I don't think.
that's
We need
almost
to.
as Jimmy, that's almost as bad as that. Here's a kid who's in foster care, and the counties take the kid's social security disbursement money and they take it away from that child, right? And the cost to the county is, X amount of dollars. And I'm like, well, why is that okay? It's
You know
just one
about
of those.
that, Barry?
Go ahead,
Do you
Jim.
know about that deal? So,
I'm listening.
so these they're a survivor or something, and they've gotten their parents' Social Security, and they become in the foster system. And the county, instead of putting the money aside for this, when they turn 18, they'll have some money to go to college or do whatever. The county keeps the money. They just keep it, and they don't tell the kid that they have it. And we're working on that, right? Is that in your committee?
Yeah, that part of it is, Jim. I think that,
Yeah,
no, I think you
it's
just met
just
with the
wrong.
county. And it's like a $6 million gap. But the other thing, Judge, this will hurt you too. 75% of homeless youth, right? On the Wilder study, this 75% of homeless youth were once foster kids, and it's like, whose bright idea was it not to set up a trust for this kid when they turn 18 that they could maybe go to school or go get a trade someplace, right? Instead, they leave them with nothing. Not okay. Not okay.
Hey, Judge, do you have any questions for us?
Jeez.
We're working our way through the list just fine. We're slowly knocking them off. We have
So,
another viewer
Judge,
who wants.
I want to know, Judge, when you first saw that Abeler and I were going to be your guests tonight, what was the first thing that popped on your head?
We're not going to get through all the questions. That was the first thing that came up. So now, and I'm going to try to get to that next question, which is, what about a bonding bill? Is there going to be a bonding bill? What is it going to look like? Senator Hoffman.
Yes, absolutely going to be a bonding bill. I think there was agreement last year of a really robust bonding bill, and I just met with the bonding chair today, and she said, I just want to go through these projects that you had, and I said, well, in true fashion, I need to add a few more to that. But she said, no, we are moving forward with what we did last year. So that's what I know. I don't know when that's going to happen, but that's what I know right now, Judge.
Senator Abeler.
And I hope that we can, and I would be happy to vote for a bonding bill, but nothing is as easy as it seems. And very frankly, the now deep minority, it's 161 people in Lakeville would have changed their votes. We'd be sharing different hats. And I'm not begrudging that with my friend John. I think he's a good chair and worthy of it. But sometimes the majority has a way to not be kind to the minority, and in a way that affects their interest in cooperating. And so a lot of the committee that I serve on, the health committee, has 6 Democrats and 3 Republicans when they have a margin of 1. It should be 6-4. Senator Hoffman wanted 6-5, only got 6-4. Rulings from the chair about that are clearly biased, and the speed of some of these bills that are very extreme and leaving us out in the side have affected not the interest in having a bonding bill, but in the interest in being noticed and being relevant. Anyway, if you look at the statewide votes of people who voted for all the Republicans, all the Democrats, 8,000 more people in the state voted for Democrats than voted for Republicans out of 1,000,006 votes cast for the winners. And so there will be a bonding bill, I hope, and I'm eager to get to be involved in there. But there's a dynamic that goes on that, especially in the Senate, there's supposed to be an air of collaboration, not in we can do this because we have 34 votes. And that feeling is coming through too much. And I have done all I can do as a member of the minority to reach out to some of the majority members and encourage them to soften that and to get us back on track so we can be collaborators. The best government, the best work we do is when the ideas from both sides get blended and make a third resultant idea. Some of the worst things that come or when one side just does whatever it wants, be it Republican or Democrat, just going all off on their own. So hopefully that the leadership will recognize that and make some more outreaches to make it that the system work better, so that all 67 of us can be engaged in the process.
Well, and of course, the bonding bill requires supermajority. I think the viewers
Right.
should be aware of that as well.
It's one of the few bargaining chips we think we have sometimes, and I'm not using it as a chip, but there are many people on my side who are feeling aggrieved, and aggrieved people are just waiting to come to the table and be part of the solutions.
So we've had some discussion this week about education and fully funding education, and proposals have been made. Viewers want to know what the status is of what I used to call K through 12 education. I guess we'd now say pre-K through 12 education. Senator Abeler, we'll start with you and go to Senator Hoffman.
Well, it's been a really hard time. And unfortunately, I'm back on the Education Policy Committee, not the Finance Committee. But schools are still reeling from the effects of COVID, and students are as well. And there are students who are, in many cases, a year behind in their reading and their math, particularly some of the first, second, and third graders. And I'm greatly concerned about what is going to happen there. The governor has proposed a very large package, which some say fully funds education, which that term is not defined very well, but it's certainly a good influx, which could help. But the key is how you spend it. And so how can we find ways to reach into these students, families and homes and their educational process to get them back on track? And I don't know why we haven't held back more of those students, because we would pay for them and they could experience second grade a second time and maybe get back on track. In most cases, we're not doing that, but that's part of the debate. Senator Hoffman probably knows more about the money part.
Senator Hoffman.
It's interesting that the conversation that Jim Abeler brings up. There was a debate years ago about the age 5 kindergarten. It was like, why were we pushing kids so fast to get into first grade, Jim? Remember that? It's almost the same thing. And
yeah.
and when people talk about closing the achievement gap, there were certain districts that figured out how to do that. I don't know. There's one in Jim's backyard that closed the achievement gap by doing, a compensatory education model that worked well, right?
That's the largest school district in the state?
Yeah, I think it's the largest, Jim, like 41,000 students. They're right, Anoka, Hennepin. So, but what you're hearing, Judge, that districts are now experiencing is this behavioral health piece, and I'm talking the umbrella behavioral health, both the substance use and the mental health side of it, that is overwhelming the ability to teach. And going to Jim Abeler's point that kids fell behind, well, they also socially fell behind. So what are we doing with that? I brought a bill this past week, Jim, that was to increase school counselors, believe it or not, and increase school psychologists. Yes, indeed, right? Those are all billable services to Medicaid, Judge, that shouldn't cost people any more than what it is, because they're able to recoup those funds because they're medically related services. But in the school counselor side of it, we still rank terrible. We have one counselor to Jim. I think you probably saw that. Is it still 650 or something?
I think so, yeah.
Students? Yeah, and it's just like not okay. So if you're going to say you want to address or fix a system, you got to look at the whole system, Judge. And so I'm glad Abeler's sitting in policy to address that. And, I don't know what we're going to do financially.
Hey, Judge, if you want to do a lightning round, we could just talk short. We're capable, believe it or not.
All right, let's start with a lightning round question. A viewer in Northeast Minneapolis wants to know about crime on the light rail and what the legislature, if anything, is going to do about it. Senator Hoffman, start with you.
So I think we should really increase the ability that the Metro Police have. It's a good group of people, and we need to absolutely build their capacity higher, Judge. Thank you.
I'm against crime.
You're against crime. Okay, all right, we'll take that. We've had in the past questions from viewers dealing with the issue of the regent selection process and what does that look like in this session? Senator Abeler, we'll start with you.
Oh my! We have to pick 4. This is one of the most challenging and personally least. It's the problem with the system is there's a group called RCAC, which is a group of 20 24 people that bring forward good candidates. They screen them. And then at the end, they go to the committees who then bring forward a recommendation for a floor nominee. And at the end, anybody can be nominated from the floor. If we can get rid of the floor nomination process, the system will work well. Otherwise, the governor should just appoint them and be done with it.
Agreed.
Hoffman.
Lightning round. I agree with Abeler on that one.
All right. Chronic wasting disease, concerns with deer farms and the spread of chronic wasting disease. Senator Hoffman, we'll start with you.
So there's a representative in the other body who actually breathes, and sleeps this chronic wasting disease, and he's actually going to make it a priority. That would be Representative Hansen. And so looking forward to having those conversations over, because I just got reappointed to the Environment, Energy, and Climate Committee, and I think we'll address some of that in the environment side of it, but most of it's going to sit over in agriculture.
Agreed.
Senator Abeler. We have a question from a viewer about electric cars and what is the legislature going to do about electric cars? Senator Abeler, we'll start with you.
Well, a big push, and then John can answer more. So electric cars, I mean, they're great, but they're not the Shangri-La, especially in the northern climates. I just met a guy yesterday. He's all excited about his electric car. He gets 260 miles on a charge, maybe 180 in the winter. I said, "Do you go to Florida in that thing?" "Oh yeah, be a long trip." And so there's a place for those, but actually the answer in my mind in all that is better storage. So when more storage happens, we can do so much more things. I'll leave it at that.
Senator Hoffman.
Spot on. Battery storage is a big issue. You also have a capacity problem here. We don't have the infrastructure to be able to support it. And then the third thing is, our leased vehicle sales tax, also in our gas tax. The more and more you have in that, how are you going to offset the fact that we're going to absolutely lose revenue from the gas tanks in that? Now, I'm not saying I'm for that, but I'm just putting that out that's going to be a problem, judges, revenue.
You wouldn't mind taxing the rich people that have electric cars.
See, this is Judge Barry and I. He's like, I said the top 1% don't pay enough in taxes. And for the last 10 years, he and I have done like joint town hall hearings. And it's like, and then of course, then the next spot, James will say, Hoffman wants to do the top 1%, but there's not enough 1%ers around anymore. They all move. So did I get that right, Jim?
That's perfect.
Yeah, it's nice when you could present the other guest's argument. Saves time. So let's go to another question that we touched on earlier, but we didn't actually get to the end of the page. And this viewer is reminding of this and wants to know: are we in fact going to enact something that will involve ending the taxation of Social Security benefits? Senator Hoffman.
Yes, matter of fact, there's 4 bills out there. I'm one of the co-authors on one of them. Yes.
Senator Abeler.
I hope so. And just so you know, I think the Senate is stronger in this than the House. And so there's some senators who have vowed that we're going to do it. And so hopefully in this way, this bill, the Senate, in this situation, the Senate can lead the way and drag the House along. The governor did a limited repeal, needs to be fully repealed.
We have a viewer who wants to know about higher education and what the budget for the University of Minnesota and the state college system is likely to look like. Senator Abeler, we'll go to you first.
Shockingly, in a budget that spent over $20 billion, the governor gave $65 million a year to Minnesota State. I don't know what the U number was, but I presume it was similarly light. That's not enough money to pay the 2% COLA to the staff. And there's a few priorities, and I didn't come on here to bash the governor. I'm trying to work with the guy. If he'd ever call me back, which he seems to have a hard time doing, but I keep reaching out to him. I'm not kidding. Actually, I wish he would have engaged me more, and a lot of us do wish that as well. And so in the long-term care side and the higher ed side, some of these areas that are so critical that without, and particularly Minnesota State, is every man's, every woman's, every young person's opportunity to go. They admit them all to have a chance to succeed. And they're in everybody's backyard. We got to keep them strong, and 65 million in a budget of 20 billion is really comical.
Yep, he's short. He's really short on that. Adding all those buckets, Jim, it's like $300 million is what Senator Fate has, and that's not even close to what it's needed. So, it's a lot of work to do on that one, Judge.
Need training.
Transportation, Senator Hoffman, what's happening in transportation this session? We have you each get about 20 seconds here. It's yours.
I want to see non-emergency medical transportation providers get fully funded the rates that they need, because we got some people that desperately need that. There you go.
Senator Abeler.
Well, yeah, the governor's proposed some car tab increases and a sales tax. I think there's enough money in the system to get the roads working that we need, particularly ones in Coon Rapids, Champlin, Dayton, and Rogers.
Highway 10.
Highway 10.
Are those taxes going to pass, do you think?
Not if it's up to me. Look at that look on John's face.
Judge, I don't think you got 34 votes yet in the Senate on that one. I don't.
Holy cow, we got a $17 billion surplus and you're raising taxes. Like, could have had a V8.
All right. I want to thank our guests this evening, Senator Jim Abeler from Anoka, Senator John Hoffman from Champlin. I want to thank you, the viewers, for your participation this evening. We did a lightning round and covered a lot of topics. I'm really grateful for the cooperation of our guests. We invite you to join us next week and all the weeks that follow as we unravel the mysteries in St. Paul. Thank you and good night.
Your Legislators is made possible by the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. From developing best practices that help farmers better protect our natural resources to the latest innovations in corn-based plastics, Minnesota corn farmers are proud to invest in third-party research leading to a more sustainable future for our local communities. Minnesota Farmers Union, standing for agriculture, working for farmers. On the web at mfu.org.